Now, I'm sure that most of you know the old story about the astronaut who went far out into space. He was asked on his return whether he had been to heaven and seen God. He said, yes. And so they asked him, well, what about God? And he said, she is black. Although this is a well-known and often repeated story, it is very profound. Because I tell you, I knew a monk who started out in life pretty much as an agnostic or an atheist. Then he began to read Henri Bergson, the French philosopher who proclaimed the vital force, the élan vital, and so on. The more he read into this philosophy, the more he saw that these thinkers were really talking about God. I've read a great deal of theological reasoning about the existence of God, and many arguments begin with this premise. If you are intelligent and reasonable, you cannot be the product of a mechanical and meaningless universe. Figs do not grow on thistles. Grapes do not grow on thorns. Therefore, as an expression of the universe, as an aperture through which the universe observes itself, you cannot be a mere fluke. If this world brings forth people as a tree brings forth fruit, then the universe itself, the energy which underlies it, the essence of what it's all about, the ground of being, as Paul Tillich called it, must be intelligent. When you come to that conclusion, however, you must be careful, because you might make an unwarranted leap. Namely, the leap to conclude that this intelligence, this marvelous designing power that produces all things, is the biblical God. Be careful. That God, contrary to his own commandments, is often fashioned in the graven image of a paternal, authoritarian, beneficent tyrant of the ancient Near East. It's easy to fall into that trap because it's institutionalized in the Roman Catholic Church, the synagogue, the Protestant churches, all there, ready for you to accept. By the pressure of social consensus, it's very natural to assume that when somebody uses the word God, it is that father figure they mean. Even Jesus used the analogy of the Father for his experience of God, simply because that was the image available to him in his culture. But nowadays, we are rebelling against the image of the authoritarian father. This rebellion is particularly pronounced in the United States, where we are a republic, not a monarchy. And if you, as a loyal citizen of this country, believe that a republic is the best form of government, you can hardly believe that the universe is a monarchy. To reject the paternalistic image of God as an idol is not necessarily to be an atheist. I have advocated something called atheism in the name of God. That is to say, a contact, a relationship with God, with the ground of your being, that does not need to be embodied or expressed in any specific image. Now, theologians, on the whole, don't like this idea. I find that, in my discussions with them, they prefer to be a bit hard-nosed about the nature of God. They want to say that God indeed has a very specific nature. Ethical monotheism means that the governing power of this universe holds definite opinions and rules to which our minds and actions must conform. If you don't, you will go against the fundamental grain of the universe and be punished. Traditionally, you might burn in hell forever. In more modern terms, you might simply fail to be an authentic person. There is this sense that authority governs the world, and it's not you. It's something else. This Jewish, Christian, and Muslim approach often makes people feel strange, estranged from the root and ground of their being. Many people never grow up. They remain in awe of an image of a grandfatherly God. Now, I'm a grandfather. I have 5 grandchildren, so I'm no longer in awe of grandfathers. I know I'm just as fallible as my own grandfathers were. I'm not about to bow down to an image of God with a long white beard. Of course, we intelligent people don't literally believe in that kind of God, do we? We think of God as spirit, as something undefinable and infinite. But the images of God have a far more powerful effect upon our emotions than our ideas. When people read the Bible or sing hymns, Ancient of Days, who sittest throned in glory, immortal, invisible, God only wise, in light inaccessible hid from our eyes, they still envision that figure with a beard, lurking in the back of their emotions. So we should think, first of all, in contrary imagery. Imagine, instead of God the Father, God the Mother. Imagine that this is not a luminous being, blazing with light, but an unfathomable darkness, as depicted in Indian mythology by Kali, the Great Mother. Kali, represented in the most terrifying imagery, has a long tongue dripping with blood, fang-like teeth, a scimitar in one hand, and a severed head in the other. She tramples on her husband, Shiva, who represents the destructive aspect of the deity, where all things are dissolved so they may be reborn. Here, then, is this blood-sucking, terrible mother as the image of supreme reality behind this universe. Imagine her as the representative of the octopus, the spider, the terrifying, creepy-crawly force at the end of the line that we're all afraid of. Now, that's a very important image. Suppose, just for argument's sake, that all of you here right now are feeling fairly alright. You're not in a hospital, you don't have the screaming memes, you've had dinner, and you're feeling pretty good. But in the background of your minds, very far back, you sense something absolutely ghastly that simply mustn't happen. Against that, which isn't happening but could, you feel pretty alright. And that absolutely ghastly thing is Kali. So we begin to wonder, could the presence of this Kali be, in a way, beneficent? How would you know things were good unless there was something that wasn't good at all? I'm not proposing this as a final view, but rather as a way of looking at a problem, a way of getting our minds out of their usual ruts. She's black. The feminine, philosophically, represents the negative principle. Now, of course, people today, especially those advocating women's liberation, may dislike associating the feminine with the negative, as negative has acquired poor connotations. But, as we say, accentuate the positive, a purely male chauvinist sentiment. How would you know that you were outstanding without something instating? You cannot appreciate convex without concave. You cannot appreciate the firm without the yielding. Therefore, the so-called negativity of the feminine is life-giving and very important. But we live in a culture that doesn't recognize it. You see a drawing of a bird, and you don't notice the white paper underneath it. You see the print in a book, but the page doesn't matter. Yet, without the underlying page, there could be no visible print. What we call substance, that which stands underneath, is the great function of the feminine, to be the underlying support. Hence, the feminine is represented by space, which is, of course, black at night. Without this black, empty space, there would be no possibility of seeing the stars. The stars shine out of space, and astronomers are beginning to realize that stars are a function of space. This idea challenges our common sense. We think of space as inert nothingness. But space is basic to everything. It's like consciousness. We can't imagine what consciousness is because it's the elusive background of all we know. We focus on objects, sounds, things within our vision or hearing. But the thing that embraces it all, we barely notice it. It's like trying to look at your own head. You find nothing. And yet, that is what enables you to see, just as space allows the stars to shine. So, there's something very curious about all this. That which you cannot put your finger on, that which always escapes you, that which is completely elusive, the blank, seems to be absolutely necessary for there to be anything whatsoever. Now, let's take this further. Kali is also a principle of death, because she carries a scimitar in one hand and a severed head in the other. Death, this is tremendously important to think about. We put it off. Death is swept under the carpet in our culture. In the hospital, they try to keep you alive as long as possible in utter desperation. They won't tell you that you're going to die. When their relatives have to be informed that it's a hopeless case, they say, "Don't tell this to the patient." And all the relatives come around with hollow grins and say, "Well, you'll be all right in about a month, and then we'll go and have a holiday somewhere and sit by the sea and the birds and whatnot." And the dying person knows that this is mockery. Of course, we've made death howl with all kinds of ghouls. We've invented dreadful afterlives. I mean, the Christian version of heaven is as abominable as the Christian version of hell. Nobody wants to be in church forever. Children are absolutely horrified when they hear these hymns that say, "Prostrate before thy throne, to law and gaze on thee." They can't imagine what this imagery means. In a very subtle theological way, I could wangle that statement around to make it extremely profound. I mean, to be prostrate at once and to gaze on the other hand, see, is a coincidentia oppositorum, a coincidence of opposites, which is very, very deep. But to a child, it's just a crick in the neck. And that's the sort of imagery we're brought up with. So, the idea of what might happen after death. Well, you're going to be faced with your judge, the one who knows all about you. This is Big Papa, who knows you're a naughty boy or a very naughty girl, especially a girl, from the beginning of things. He's going to look right through to the core of your inauthentic existence. and what kind of heebie-jeebies may come up. Or you may believe in reincarnation, and you think that your next life will be the rewards and the punishments for what you've done in this life. You know you got away with murder in this life, and think, oh, things are going to happen next time around. So you look upon death as a catastrophe. Then there are other people who say, well, when you're dead, you're dead. Just done, nothing is going to happen at all. So, what have you got to worry about? Well, we don't quite like that idea because it spooks us. What's it going to be like to die, to go to sleep and never, never, never wake up? But there are a lot of things it's not going to be like. It's not going to be like being buried alive. It's not going to be like being in the darkness forever. I'll tell you what it's going to be like. As if you never had existed at all. Not only you, but everything else as well. There was never anything, and there's no one to regret it. And there's no problem. But think about it for a while. It's a kind of weird feeling you get when you really think about that, when you really imagine just stopping altogether. You can't even call it stop, because you can't have stop without start. And there wasn't any stop. There's just nothing. Well, then, when you come to think of it, that's the way it was before you were born. And if you go back in memory as far as you can go, you get to the same place. As you go forward in your anticipation of the future, as to what it's going to be like to be dead, anyway, it's a funny idea that this blankness is the necessary counterpart of what we call being. Now, we all think we are alive, don't we? I mean, we're really here. There is something called existence. The existentialist, Dacian, thrownness. Here we are. But how could you experience that as a reality unless you had once been dead? What gives us any ghost of a notion that we are here except by contrast with the fact that we once weren't? And later on, we won't be. But this thing is a cycle, like positive and negative poles in electricity. So this, then, is the value of the symbolism of she is black. She, the womb principle, the receptive, the instanding, the void, and the dark. And so, that is to come into the presence of the God who has no image. Behind the Father image, behind the Mother image, behind the image of light inaccessible, and behind the image of profound and abysmal darkness, there is something else which we can't conceive at all. Dionysius the Areopagite called it the luminous darkness. Nagarjuna called it Shunyata, the void. Shankara called it Brahman, that of which nothing at all can be said, neti neti, beyond all conception whatsoever. And you see, that is not atheism in the formal sense of the word. This is a profoundly religious attitude, because what it corresponds to practically is an attitude to life of total trust, of letting go. When we form images of God, they're all really exhibitions of our lack of faith, something to hold on to, something to grasp. How firm a foundation! What lies underneath us, the rock of ages or whatever, ein Festberg. But when we don't grasp, we have the attitude of faith. If you let go of all the idols, you will, of course, discover that what this unknown is, which is the foundation of the universe, is precisely you. It's not the you think you are, not your opinion of yourself, not your idea or image of yourself, not the chronic sense of muscular strain which we usually call I. You can't grasp it, of course not. Why would you need to suppose you could? What would you do with it, and who would do what with it? You could never get it. It is otherness, that profound central mystery. And the attitude of faith is to stop chasing it, to stop grabbing it. Because if that happens, the most amazing things follow. But all these ideas of the spiritual, the godly, as this attitude of must, the laying down of laws which we are bound to follow, all this jazz, is not the only way of being religious, and of relating to the ineffable mystery that underlies ourselves in the world.